pop it into Zoom. Those of you listening on Zoom, we'd love to hear from you. You can also reach us at contact@medtechcrossroads.com. And as always, if you like what you're hearing, please do subscribe to us on YouTube. We need a breakthrough. It reminds me of Star Trek back in the 60s, even though I wasn't around then. I watched it in reruns. We need a breakthrough. Giving her all I can, Captain, right? What is the Breakthrough Devices Program? It's a voluntary program for certain medical devices and device-led combination products that provide for more effective treatment or diagnosis of life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating diseases or conditions. That's great. I want you to pay attention to life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating diseases or conditions. We'll come back to that in a moment. But if the product that you're working on you believe meets this, then stay tuned, because this is a really cool program that FDA has had for a number of years. It's the reworking of a program that used to be out there. But what does it give? The benefits of the Breakthrough Device Pathway or program, sprint discussions are the primary one. It's really weird to have FDA saying, hey, we haven't heard from you in a little while. Do you want to chat? The sprints are a much more, how do I say it, normal way of interacting with the FDA. Your colleagues in industry, if you want to have a chat, you email them and you say, hey, we'd like to talk about this. Maybe a meeting gets scheduled, an agenda gets put together. You have the meeting and meeting notes come out of it. You all say, did we make a decision? And if the answer is yes, you move on with your life and your future interactions. That's kind of what a breakthrough device pathway sprint discussion can be like. It's not the whole process of needing to submit a formal Q-sub and then waiting while the FDA responds to it, and then coming back 65 days later and maybe having a teleconference or an in-person. It's a much quicker turnaround, or at least can be. How many of these have happened? As of March 31st of this year, 2023, CDRH and CBER, Center for Devices and Radiological Health, as well as the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, have granted 794 breakthrough device designations. I don't know how many submissions were made, but it's about 800 that were granted. It's been ramping up, but ironically declined last year. 2015, there were only 11, 12 in 2016, 19 in 2017, 55 in 2018, ramping up to 206 by 2021, but it dropped off in 2022. I guess people must have sort of taken a break during COVID, maybe not as many applications. Only 64 by March of 2023, but let's think about that for a second. January, February, March, that's actually only a quarter of the year. So we could be on track to be up in the 200s again here in 2023. So you're up against, a couple hundred other folks. Remember what we said before, we're going to keep coming back to it. You have to be a life-saving or effective treatment or diagnosis of life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating diseases or conditions. You want a little crib sheet here on who tends to be getting these. The majority, I shouldn't say the majority, the highest count were in cardiovascular, followed by neurology and orthopedic. Something like dental, only 3 have been granted. Obstetrics, only 4 have been granted. So again, if you do have a life-saving application in any of those lower ones, great. It might actually be of interest to the agency. But the large number here coming through in cardiovascular, neurology, and orthopedics, as well as gastroenterology and urology. How many breakthrough device pathway submissions have made it through all the way to a clearance? About 8%. Of the 794, 67 have made it through to a clearance. Now, I don't know if that's good or bad. It just is what it is, because obviously a lot of these can still be in process. But don't think that getting a breakthrough device pathway instantaneously means you're going to get clearance or you're going to get it quickly. It's really just a way for the conversation with FDA to happen more quickly and more efficiently. So it's worth it for the process, but it's not necessarily a guarantee that you're going to get cleared. If it was a guarantee that you're going to get cleared, this would be a much, much higher number. Well, how can you be eligible for the breakthrough device pathway? The device needs to provide for more effective treatment or diagnosis of life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating human diseases or conditions. So veterinary's out, you're not getting through it for a veterinary product. It doesn't have to, this doesn't have to be an absolute moonshot though. I just got to be clear on that. It needs to be more effective treatment or diagnosis of life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating human diseases or conditions. It also has to meet at least one of the following. It has to represent a breakthrough technology, or no approved or cleared alternatives exist, or it offers a significant advantage over existing approved or cleared alternatives, and getting it out there is in the best interest of the patients. So if it's a completely different technology for something that already exists, okay, might be eligible. If nothing else exists out there, it might be eligible. If you're just a lot better than what's out there, it might be eligible. Or even only if just getting this in front of patients is compelling to the agency, you also might be eligible. But what is the key? Diagnosis or treatment of life-threatening or irreversibly debilitating human disease or conditions. What if you're not a device intended for that? You can consider the Safer Technologies program. We're not covering that in this segment, but it is available. We've covered it before on the show. And the Safer Technologies program is sort of a breakthrough pathway light for technologies that don't represent life-saving technologies. So how do you apply for this? How do you get one? You need to submit a designation request for a breakthrough device, which is a type of Q submission. A pre-sub is a Q submission, so is a designation request for a breakthrough device. It should be the only request. You're not going to send something to FDA saying, hey, can we have a breakthrough? And oh, by the way, do you like our clinical trial design? That's not what we're going to do. But designation request by itself is the way to go for that. You're going to include a few things in it. The FDA recommends your designation request include information to describe the device, the proposed indication for use. Pay attention to that. Indication for use, we're going to come back to that in a moment. The regulatory history, how your device meets the statutory criteria for a breakthrough device. That was what we were talking about a minute ago. You saw how we needed to be basically life-saving and meet at least one of those 4 criteria. And then what type of marketing submission you plan to submit to the FDA for your device. Is it going to be a 510K? Is it going to be a de novo, etc.? How long to get one of these? Well, the FDA intends to request more info from you within 30 days if you submit a breakthrough device designation request. And they intend to make a determination for you within 60 days of receiving your request. Well, and like we said, time spent learning for free from MedTech Crossroads will save you headaches in your MedTech journey. So how does this apply, this little learning about the breakthrough device program? Application areas that we want to consider every time we talk about one of these things in the news. The FDA regulatory process from our perspective as a community, startup life, market research, technical development, reimbursement, fundraising, intellectual property, project management, testing, and manufacturing. This one is all about indications for use. It's all about intended use. In order to submit a breakthrough device designation to the FDA, you need to know what you're claiming. And if you're a longtime listener of the show, you'll know that this is always point number one. Before we can talk about what your regulatory process is, before we can talk about what your project management of your product development process is going to look like, before we can tell your funders what is it going to take to fundraise for this, to be able to make this product, before you know what you're going to test, you need to know what your intended use of your device is. And oftentimes people do not understand their intended use. They understand their technology. They understand how the device works, but they don't understand the value proposition, what the device is bringing to the patient. The favorite example that we've used many times and we use in live presentations when we're educating people about the medical technology development process and the medical product development process is that of a scalpel. If you have a scalpel, it's a class 1 device from FDA. It's good for cutting tissue. Well, that's all fine and good, but there are products out there that look identical to scalpels. One of them is called a cervical cone knife. It's a class 2 device. It requires a much larger process, even though the final product is a sharpened blade that looks, for all the world, like a scalpel. They're both sterile, they're both sharp, but one requires a lot more regulatory process, a lot more testing. There's more project management involved. If you were fundraising for it, there would be a lot more fundraising required, and it's going to change your startup life. So understanding the indications for use, the intended use, what you say the product is good for, and in what context it will be used, you're going to need that to submit for a breakthrough. If you hope to benefit from sprint discussions with the FDA, understanding above all else, how is my testing going to go during my development process? You really want to understand what you're claiming the device does. Downstream from there, you want to understand what user needs you have, what technical requirements you have, of course, what risks and what standards you need to meet. But to be able to have this accelerated conversation with FDA, you need to become an expert on what your intended use implies about your development process. And it's going to affect all of these things here, including your technical development and your manufacturing and everything else. But we highlighted the ones in green because they seemed to be the most germane to the subject. So I hope you enjoyed that on Breakthrough Device Pathway. You can, if you like what you heard, subscribe to us on YouTube, and look forward to seeing you on the live show every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Well, this one really caught my attention. This is the Inspire Upper Airway Stimulation. All the content here is provided by FDA.